there. For those of you guys who don't know me, I'm Jessica. I'm a licensed realtor here in the Phoenix and Scottsdale Valley. I'm also licensed in New Mexico, and I do a lot of work overseas, specifically in Spain with expats. So this is a continuation of my last video about the top biggest mistakes that I've been seeing as a real estate insider in the year 2025 and what you can do to avoid those pitfalls. Jumping right back in, let's go back with our home buyers. A lot of people who have been out of the game for a few years, maybe a few decades, they just don't understand, or maybe they just don't know all of the new rules and regulations that have been implemented over the last couple of years, especially since COVID. So things have changed immensely. And what happens a lot of times is I see some buyers who are under the impression that home buying is very similar to what it was when they bought their original home 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 30 years ago or longer. And that is just not the case. Back in the day, it was perfectly fine to find a house and put in your offer prior to talking to a lender. And that was okay to do. Today, we don't do it that way. Today, we must have a PQ, short for pre-qualification, or a POF, proof of funds, if you're going to be going the cash route. The reason why this is so important is because a seller does not want to tie their property up into escrow for you if you actually don't have the money or the finances or means to be able to follow through on your offer. So they do require this in order to have a successful offer, to accept your transaction and to move forward into going into escrow. Which leads me to my next point, your buyer broker agreement. So prior to COVID, prior to all of this, it was perfectly fine for you to meet an agent willy-nilly. You can call the listing agent, you can get on Redfin, you can get on Zillow, you can go on wherever. Call your next door neighbor who's a realtor, hey, can you go take me to see X, Y, and Z properties this weekend? And that was perfectly fine. That is not okay anymore. I'm sure that you guys may have seen, but there was a big lawsuit that happened about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years, with NAR, the National Association of Realtors. In that lawsuit, it has named that we now must sign a buyer broker agreement prior to stepping foot into any properties. And the reason why this is important is because it will clearly outline what the duties and expectations are for the relationship, as well as how the agent is expecting to get paid. So previously, the seller was the one who paid for both agents on both sides, the BAC, buyer's agent commission, and the listing fee as well. Typically, it used to be about 6%, 3% to one side, 3% to the other, and then from there, it would be broken up and allocated as such for teams, for transaction coordinating, for the brokerage fees, etc., however they want. Now that is just not the case. Now a seller does not have to pay the buyer's agent commission, and this is something that is very important that you want to talk to your agent about prior to stepping foot into anything. They can still ask the seller to pay their commission, but the seller has the right to say no, so that would fall on the buyer to go ahead and have to step up to the plate for the agent to be able to do all the paperwork and represent them. So this is a very important thing to really factor in, because that could be a full 1 to 3% of the purchase price. And a lot of people just don't have that extra money hanging around. A good agent should be able to negotiate for you and ask the seller to be able to pay that, so you are not having to cough up that extra money. Of course, everything is negotiable, but talk to your agent, talk to them about their policies, how they want to move forward with things. It's really not as scary as it looks or as it seems, I promise you. And a good agent should also have a clause in there, so if you guys are just not working out, like you guys are butting heads and you guys just do not fit together and don't have a great relationship, like a working relationship that is conducive, at that point, you guys can reevaluate and maybe dissolve or ask that agent to transfer you to another agent, either on their team or otherwise. They can do what we call a referral. The next issue that I see is where a couple might fall in absolute love with a particular property without doing their due diligence or looking into the background of things, especially the neighborhood, communities, school districts, etc. So you might find a couple that's rushing into something because they don't want somebody else to step up and take their property without taking the precautionary steps. What I mean by this is checking out who your neighbors are. Is it underneath a flight path? Are you going to hear the airplanes coming in and out on the daily? Is there a hospital nearby? Is there a school nearby? Are you going to be late to work because there is a school crossing area right in front of your home? Are there dogs that are off leash all over the place? And then maybe you have a small little animal or a small child that might get hurt or in the way of things. Are there fast cars coming up and down the street? How far is your grocery store from your home? How far is your commute to your work? Those are all things that you might want to consider prior to putting in your offer, or at least during the inspection. Now for my home sellers. Of course, one of the biggest problems that I see over and over again is the poor quality of marketing. So this can look like a whole variety of things. Possibly the sellers just decide that they don't want to pay for any commissions, so they want to do everything on their own and be a FSBO for sale by owner. In that case, they usually do not post on the MLS because typically you need a license for that, or you can do a la carte and maybe they don't want to pay for that. Possibly they don't want to pay for the professional photos, professional videos, professional staging, have the open houses by other industry professionals because they want to do it themselves to save their money. So the reason why this is so bad is because from a buyer's point of view, it appears that the seller is being very cheap. And if they are being very cheap right from the get-go coming out the gate, then that makes them think, well, if they're being cheap with the marketing, I wonder if they were cheap with the maintenance and the repairs of the house as well. Usually it makes them think, well, if there were any repairs, it was probably done by themselves and not through a licensed plumber or electrician or the respective trade. So the other thing with that is having those professional photos, having those professional videos, having it listed in all those areas and realms that a realtor, a licensed realtor, can bring you, typically will yield you a much higher ROI in the long scheme of things. So even though people think that they're going to save some money by maybe holding off on the $10,000, $20,000 of commissions, but in reality, they're going to be getting a lot less in their offers that come through. So then they're going to be dealing with the headache of all of the paperwork and putting themselves more at risk. Realtors, we usually carry errors and omissions insurance, amongst other things. Being cheap with marketing and not going with professional representation not only brings you in lower quality leads and lower quality offers most of the time, but it also puts you at much higher risk. So realtors, we carry special insurance for things that you might have accidentally omitted or left off of, say, your SPUDs, your seller's property disclosure statement. We are there to protect you and to help you. We are there to hold your hand and make sure to mitigate any of these little issues that might hold up in court or might get you sued. For home sellers, completely skipping repairs and selling a home as is can really come back to bite you in the butt, especially for VA clients and FHA clients. Those types of clients, they absolutely have some standards, industry standards by the VA and with the FHA, Fannie Mae, that they need to have done in order for their loan to qualify. So if you are the home seller and you tell, say, the buyer, I'm absolutely not going to do any repairs at all, and it might be something as simple as maybe the burners on your stove aren't working, you could just replace that stove with another used stove for a couple $100. Is it really worth it to blow up the entire deal just because you don't want to lift a finger? Of course, everybody has their own reasons for things, but I highly recommend consulting with your realtor about which repairs are absolutely necessary and which ones I would skip. So for home sellers, we have covered poor marketing, we have covered the skipping of repairs, lack of transparency, and of course, overpricing your home. That is what I would arguably say is the biggest problem that I see in 2025. A lot of times we are seeing sellers who still feel like we are in a seller's market from 2020 to 2022-ish, and it is absolutely not that time anymore. It is not the time to overprice your home so significantly that it just sits there on the market for months or even years. My rule of thumb is if you don't see any activity in the home for a few weeks, then you know you are overpriced because the market will tell you what's going on. If you see a ton of activity in your home or you're getting lots of offers, maybe you are underpriced. But you want to have that sweet spot where you're still getting activity, you're just not so underpriced that you're devaluing yourself. This is where a great agent who can come up with a CMA or some really good comparables will help you determine what you need to price your home at so you are able to get an adequate offer. And of course, if you or someone you know is moving here to the Phoenix Scottsdale Valley or selling, I am more than happy to help you out, give you a CMA, and get you exactly where you need to be so you are set up for success. Feel free to give me a call at 602-756-2562.